The night was thick with an eerie darkness that clung to the road like a shroud. The only source of light came from the flickering headlights of my old rig as it rumbled down the desolate highway. I was a lone trucker, hauling cargo through the heart of nowhere. The silence inside the cab was broken only by the low hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the CB radio. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 3 a.m., the witching hour. As I drove, the road seemed to stretch on forever, winding through dense woods that whispered secrets in the rustling leaves. The darkness outside pressed against the windows like a suffocating presence, and an unsettling feeling gnawed at the pit of my stomach. I decided to break the monotony by tuning into the CB radio, hoping to catch some chatter from fellow truckers. But the airwaves were dead, devoid of the usual banter, just static and the occasional distant hum of another engine. A chill ran down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I rounded a bend, the headlights caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure standing by the side of the road. A hitchhiker, perhaps? But there was something unsettling about the way they stood, perfectly still, facing away from the road. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to keep driving. The last thing I needed was a stranger bringing their troubles into my cab. The road stretched on, and I began to notice strange shapes flickering at the edge of my vision. Shadows that seemed to dance just out of reach, disappearing when I turned to look directly at them. The air inside the cab grew heavy, and a sense of unease settled over me like a fog. I tried to shake off the feeling, blaming it on fatigue and the late hour. But then the radio crackled to life. A voice, soft and whispery, cut through the static. "Trucker." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. The voice sounded otherworldly, like it was carried on a breeze from a realm beyond. I glanced around the cab, half expecting to see the hitchhiker from before, but there was nothing there. "Who's there?" I stammered into the CB mic, my voice trembling. No response, just the lingering static. I swallowed hard, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. The darkness outside seemed to press closer, and the trees lining the highway took on sinister shapes in the dim glow of my headlights. I pressed on, determined to put distance between myself and whatever haunted the night. But the shadows outside the truck seemed to grow thicker, and the whispers in the wind grew louder. The air in the cab became stifling, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. As I approached a deserted gas station, I considered pulling over to gather my thoughts. But the foreboding atmosphere around me made the idea of stopping unbearable. I decided to keep driving, hoping that the rhythmic sound of the tires on the pavement would drown out the unsettling noises. The radio crackled to life again, the voice more insistent this time. "Turn back, trucker." A shiver ran down my spine. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice seemed to seep into my very bones, a haunting melody that resonated with the darkest corners of my mind. Ignoring the voice, I focused on the road ahead, but the surroundings had changed. The trees, once familiar, now twisted and contorted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The road stretched endlessly into a void, a tunnel of darkness that seemed to have no end. I glanced at the side mirrors and my blood ran cold. Faces appeared in the shadows, pale and featureless, watching me with empty eyes. They seemed to hover just beyond the reach of the headlights, their expressions frozen in silent agony. Panic set in as I realized I was no longer in control of the truck. The steering wheel had a mind of its own, turning of its own accord. The engine roared louder, drowning out the ghostly whispers that filled the cab. I fought against the unnatural force guiding the truck, but it was futile. The surroundings blurred into a nightmarish landscape, and the air inside the cab grew thick with malevolence. The faces in the shadows multiplied, a legion of silent onlookers. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the truck came to a stop. The engine died, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. I sat in the silence, my breaths heavy and labored. The faces in the shadows retreated, and the twisted trees reverted to their normal state. I cautiously stepped out of the cab, the cool night air a welcome relief. The road ahead stretched out into the darkness, but it no longer held the same sense of foreboding. The hitchhiker from earlier stood at a distance, fading into the shadows. I climbed back into the truck, the engine roaring to life as if nothing had happened. The radio crackled with static, and I hesitated before switching it off. The road ahead beckoned, and I drove into the night, haunted by the memory of the supernatural journey that had unfolded on that desolate highway.